I never imagined the laughter in my own living room would be the sound of betrayal. My daughter-in-law is pointing at my wedding photo, telling the stranger, "This old thing will be thrown away." My memories are being turned into merchandise. Every familiar corner of the house has suddenly become a battlefield. She thinks selling the house is the end, but for me, the fight to reclaim the honor and this family has only just begun. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Margaret Collins, but everyone call me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. Tuesday morning in Oakwood, Ohio, began like any other, quiet and colorless. The early light slipped through the blinds, catching the dust motes in the living room and making them dance like tiny fairies. I held my coffee cup, the old porcelain one with the chipped rim that I never bothered to fix. The warm bitterness slid down my throat, yet my heart felt cold and hollow. My eyes lingered on the old photograph sitting atop the fireplace. Thomas, my husband, smiling at me after a summer fishing trip. He'd been gone nearly 6 years now, but his image haunted me every morning. I could still hear his soft laugh echoing down the hallway, still feel his hand resting on my shoulder like an invisible reminder. Maggie, don't let anyone or anything destroy this home. I took a deep breath. The scent of coffee and jasmine mingled in the air, wrapping me in a fragile sense of safety and familiarity. Our house, now only mine, was a repository of a lifetime. Shelves packed with the leather-bound books Thomas loved to read before bed. Old blankets draped across the sofa that still carried his warmth. His treasured Elvis collection he refused to part with, and his fishing trophies polished like sacred relics. This wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was memory, love, and the fragments of an entire life. I sat down in the armchair, leaned back, and exhaled. Can I really keep all this together? I whispered, afraid even the air might hear me. Thomas had always been the decision maker, the one who held this house steady. And now there was only me. I could feel the weight of memory and responsibility pressing on my shoulders, nearly crushing me beneath its invisible burden. And then I heard laughter. Not ordinary laughter. Not the warm kind I once knew. It was sharp, cold, slicing through the morning air like a blade, and it made my heart leap. I froze, the coffee cup halfway to my lips, eyes wide, heart pounding so hard I could hear it drumming in my head. That laugh didn't belong to a peaceful morning. It was a warning, an intrusion into my private sanctuary. I moved toward the window and peeked through the blinds, then looked into the living room. And there she was, Jessica Harper, my daughter-in-law, 35, with perfectly curled blonde hair, a fitted business suit, heels clicking on the wooden floor, carrying herself more like a CEO than a woman standing in her mother-in-law's home. She stood in the middle of the room, gesturing, speaking as if she were giving a professional real estate tour. "The house is appraised at $1.2 million. We can close by Friday." Her voice rang out, cold, precise, devoid of any trace of family warmth. The cup slipped from my hand. Porcelain clinked against the saucer, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the table. A wave of dizziness swept through me, and I gasped, as though drowning in icy water. No. This house. How could this be happening? The man beside her, the client, Lewis, stood politely, clearly unaware he'd just walked into a family battlefield he couldn't possibly comprehend. His polished suit and well-mannered posture betrayed his discomfort. His eyes darted across the room, taking in the fishing trophies, the family photos, the old books, artifacts of a life he didn't belong to. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in. But the more I breathed, the harder my heart hammered. My home, my memories, all of it being appraised, discussed, weighed, while I was treated as if I had no say at all. Moving carefully, I slipped through the side door, the one I always kept slightly stuck, just to remind myself it was there. My mind spun. Why would Jessica do this? For money? Convenience? Or something colder? Something I hadn't yet seen coming? When I entered the living room, her laughter echoed again. Jessica was explaining to Louis about the backyard view, about the morning light spilling into the kitchen, about how perfect the yard was for summer barbecues. Her tone was professional, rehearsed, as if she were describing a model home, not the living space of a grieving woman. I stepped fully into the room and the laughter stopped. Jessica turned to face me, her smile fixed, her eyes cool. "Mother-in-law, I didn't expect you back so soon," she said, tilting her head like she was greeting a brunch guest, completely ignoring the betrayal laced in her words. I drew in a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "What's going on here?" Jessica didn't hesitate. Her heels clicked as she approached, her voice measured but every word calculated. "It's done, Maggie. We're selling the house. After all, your life is just too much work for you now." Anger flared in me, hot, sharp. But I held it in, reshaping it into something quieter, stronger. Instead of exploding, I looked around the room. The fireplace lined with family photos, the keepsakes Thomas loved, the old fishing trophies, each a reminder of my claim, my stewardship, my right to stand firm. I straightened my back, locked eyes with her, and spoke slowly, evenly. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" Jessica's brow lifted slightly. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, but quickly returned. "This is for your own good, Maggie. You won't have to worry about upkeep anymore, and think about the money. You could finally rest." I almost laughed, but instead, I stayed silent, letting resilience rise within me like a tide. Louis shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. And in that moment, I knew. Maggie Collins, the woman who had already survived loss, could still hold her ground. I set the coffee cup down gently, inhaled, and smiled. Slowly, deliberately. Watch me. That seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning had shattered, but I could feel resolve coursing through me. Today, I would remind everyone that Maggie Collins was not someone to be dismissed or pushed aside. I was still here, strong, steady, and ready to protect what was mine. I took slow, deliberate steps toward the living room, my heart pounding so violently it felt ready to burst from my chest. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet sounded like the house itself was warning me. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee that had lingered in the air was now overpowered by a strong, expensive perfume, not the warm scent of jasmine flowers I had planted by the window. It was Jessica's scent, my daughter-in-law's, 35, confident, pragmatic, and now utterly foreign. I stopped at the doorway, forcing myself to take a deep breath to steady the dizziness rising within me. The room, once filled with memories, was now dominated by the presence of a woman I once trusted. On the bookshelf, my old leather-bound volumes once arranged carefully in the order I preferred, were being pointed at by Jessica as she spoke not of the stories within, but of their market value. Nearby, Thomas's old fishing trophy, dusted by time, was being touched by her as if it were a mere decorative prop for a showing. My eyes fixed on Jessica. I recognized those eyes. Cold, hollow, stripped of warmth or respect. I had once imagined family moments with her, believed she would be the one to help preserve this home. But now, she was a combatant in a battle I never chose to fight. The sting of betrayal reached deep into my bones. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, and my mouth went dry. I wanted to speak, to object, but feared that any word might shatter the fragile composure I was clinging to. Jessica continued her presentation to the potential buyer, a middle-aged man, Mr. Lewis, who looked uneasy as he surveyed the room. I watched him carefully, the way his eyes avoided Jessica's and darted briefly toward me. In that moment, I caught a flicker of uncertainty, or perhaps quiet empathy. And for a fleeting second, I felt comforted. At least, not everyone was seduced by her polished confidence. I stepped fully into the room, controlling each movement, determined to stay calm. Jessica turned toward me, her smile unwavering, her gaze sharp. "Maggie, everything's under control. The house is appraised at $1.2 million, and we can close by Friday." Her voice cut through the air, crisp and cold, each word slicing like a blade. My breath hitched. My hands trembled as I set the coffee cup down on the table. Inside me, two impulses battled, one to shout, one to stay silent. I remembered Thomas's words, "Never fight when anger leads the way." I forced myself to inhale deeply, to swallow my rage, to embody the calm woman my son and I needed to see. Jessica didn't notice the storm within me. She kept talking. "Look at the library, Mom. Imagine the buyer's children running around here, reading these books. Isn't it better they be appreciated by someone who can actually take care of them?" Her tone was soft, but each word pierced like a needle. She cloaked her motives with the language of care. For the children. For appreciation. But I could hear the ambition beneath, the calculation she couldn't quite conceal. I looked around the room, letting my gaze travel over every old belonging. The family photographs lined across the mantel, each frame dusted but still sacred with memory. Every object told a story. Of Thomas and me, of autumn afternoons with golden leaves swirling outside, of children's laughter echoing from the backyard. And now, all of it was being transformed into props for a real estate deal. I closed my eyes for a moment, whispering inwardly, "Maggie, don't let anger take the lead. This isn't about pride. It's about protecting your home, your memories." Mr. Lewis's gaze lingered on small details. The desk where Thomas once worked, the stacks of old folders, the letters preserved neatly in frames. I saw something flicker in his expression, a quiet understanding, a hint of compassion that Jessica was too self-assured to perceive. A chill ran through me when Jessica leaned over and touched the armchair where Thomas used to read every night. "This could be perfect for the buyer," she said, her voice carrying that polished, harmless tone of a professional salesperson. But I knew better. To her, everything here was an item on a list, a transaction. I was the only one who still saw the heartbeat in this house. I stood motionless, breathing in the mingled scents of aged wood, paper, and jasmine. I realized something. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the legacy, the stories Thomas and I had built, the love and pride woven into every inch of this space. If I lost my composure, I would lose everything. I needed strategy. I needed quiet power, not shouts, but presence. The steady, unshakable strength of a woman who defends her family's history. Mr. Lewis gave a faint nod, acknowledging what I had silently conveyed. Jessica noticed it too. Her smile faltered just slightly. A crease appeared between her brows. For the first time, she looked unsure. Beneath her practiced calm, I sensed a flicker of unease. I stood there, surrounded by the scent of books, jasmine, and Jessica's sharp perfume, and told myself, this is the turning point. Maggie, observe, learn to fight with composure, with intellect, with heart. This isn't just a house, it's memory, love, and family. And in that moment, between betrayal's chill and my own rising resolve, a plan began to take shape inside me. I would not let anyone, not even my daughter-in-law, reduce this home to a transaction. I would protect it all, every memory, every keepsake, with intelligence, patience, and the quiet force of love no one could see coming. I took another slow step forward, toward Jessica and Mr. Lewis, wearing a faint smile but steady eyes, the kind that belonged to a 62-year-old retired librarian who had weathered loss and still stood strong. This house wasn't real estate. It was soul, legacy, and promise. And I would never let it go. That morning in Oakwood carried a strange stillness, as if the whole town somehow knew that an invisible storm was about to sweep through my home. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hands, steam rising in soft curls, yet my heart felt unbearably heavy. My eyes lingered on the photo of Richard, my late husband. His gentle smile and warm gaze seemed almost to taunt me. Would I still have the strength to stand firm through what was coming? Or would everything slip away from my grasp? I drew in a deep breath, trying to fill my lungs completely, but my palms were ice cold, gripping the cup so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Laughter rang out from the living room, not the familiar kind that once filled our family gatherings, but a sharp, cutting laugh, edged with mockery. I rose slowly, each step across the wooden floor letting out a familiar creak that reminded me this was still my house, and I had to hold on to that truth. Then I saw Jessica, my daughter-in-law, standing in the center of the living room, her posture straight, her finger pointing here and there, her eyes so cold they made my chest tighten. Every object, every keepsake, every cherished book that Richard and I had protected for years suddenly looked foreign under her gaze. I stopped, took another breath, fighting off the dizziness and fear. Jessica didn't notice me. She was too busy surveying the room. Richard's chipped fishing trophy, our family photos, assessing, it seemed, what could be taken and what could be discarded. Then she spoke, her voice cool and firm. It's done, Maggie. We need the money for the kids' college, and honestly, this house is just too much for you now. Each word landed heavy, cutting into me like a blade. This wasn't just about selling a house. It was the deep sting of betrayal from someone I had once trusted. I inhaled slowly, forcing myself not to let anger take the lead. Richard used to say, "Never fight when anger leads." I remembered his words, closing my eyes for a second to gather strength, letting calmness become my armor. I stepped into the living room, slow, deliberate steps, each one grounding me in the home we had built together. My gaze traced over the mementos, Richard's old set of books, the family portraits lining the wall, the jasmine plant I'd tended all summer, that chipped fishing trophy, each one whispering, that this house held the soul of our shared life. Mr. Lewis, the buyer, stood awkwardly in a corner, avoiding my eyes, occasionally glancing down at his shoes, as if measuring his next move. I realized then that true power doesn't come from shouting or intimidation. It lies in the quiet ability to observe, to control oneself, and to make others recognize who truly holds authority. I met Jessica's eyes, my voice calm but unyielding. "Jessica, why didn't you discuss this with me? You know, this house isn't just bricks and walls, it's memories, it's family." My gaze held hers, seeing the flicker of guilt and fear she tried to hide. Jessica lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly, her voice shaking. "Mom, I thought it was the only way. Tuition, and you've been alone. It just seemed practical." I could see the financial strain and insecurity that had driven her, but also the disregard for the emotional cost of her actions. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Mom, is everything okay? Jess is acting strange." I sighed. Even though my son wasn't there, knowing that he still trusted me gave me a sense of steadiness. I moved closer, my tone still calm yet firm. "Jessica, this house is more than walls. It's memories, and we will handle this carefully." It wasn't a threat. It was the reassertion of quiet power. I wanted her to understand that, though reconciliation might not come instantly, I had reclaimed control of the moment. I looked around, remembering the years with Richard, how we built this home together. Each object, each photograph, each book a testament to a lifetime of devotion. To protect this legacy, I knew I had to remain composed, patient, and deliberate. Jessica exhaled, her eyes clouded with remorse and fear. She realized that the weight of financial pressure and parental responsibility had driven her too far, and now she would have to face the consequence. Keeping my composure, I said quietly but firmly, "You're trying to solve everything at once, Jessica, but in doing so, you've overlooked what really matters." I pointed toward the photo of Richard and me by the old porch beam. His eyes in that picture seemed to remind me to stay strong. Mr. Lewis shifted uncomfortably, his gaze following me. He could sense it too, the shift in control. By staying calm and self-assured, I had taken back the upper hand, not through shouting or resentment, but through dignity and presence. Silence filled the room, thick, heavy, but I stood still, breathing in the familiar details of my home, every keepsake that had traveled with me through life. In that moment, I knew. True strength lies in observation, patience, and emotional control. The very lessons Richard once taught me, and that I had spent a lifetime learning. I looked at Jessica and Mr. Lewis, feeling the air itself change. Jessica uncertain, anxious, Mr. Lewis cautious, waiting for my decision. And within me rose a quiet certainty. I would not let anyone, neither my daughter-in-law nor the buyer, rewrite or sell away the memories, the home, or the values I had spent a lifetime protecting. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the thin curtains, casting pale streaks across the wooden floor of the living room. I stood in the center of the room, taking in every familiar detail. The painting Richard had done during our first vacation in Vermont, the old bookshelf filled with worn novels that smelled faintly of yellowed paper, and the weathered wooden table covered in scratches he used to call the marks of living. The faint scent of jasmine from the vase near the window lingered in the air, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Everything was still. almost completely silent. But the air felt so tense, I could sense the unease in every breath. Jessica stood near the table, her arms crossed, eyes straining to maintain composure. But she couldn't hide the small beads of sweat on her forehead, the tightness of her cheeks, or the way her lips were pressed together so firmly they nearly wrinkled. I realized something I had long refused to admit. She wasn't confident or happy in her dominance. She was desperate, and that desperation was cloaked beneath a thin layer of professionalism. I took a deep breath, letting the warmth fill my chest, reminding myself to stay calm. I thought of Richard, of our quiet mornings together, sipping coffee, sunlight spilling through the window, the house peaceful, yet alive with warmth. He used to say, "Maggie, nothing can break a home if the heart still lives there." Now it was my turn to guard that heart, to preserve the soul of this home, not letting it be invaded by anyone's selfishness or ambition. Jessica stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't expect you to react like this." I looked into her eyes I once trusted, once saw as symbols of hope and family unity. Now they were cold, anxious, torn between the will to be a good mother and the burden of her own pressures. I could feel the internal battle raging inside her, every second, every breath, a silent war. I forced myself to stay calm. This isn't the time to get angry, I told myself. Anger only means surrendering control. I took slow, steady steps, my gaze landing on the family photo hanging on the wall, the grandchildren laughing brightly beneath the old porch. That picture reminded me of my responsibility, of the reason I couldn't let this house become a bargaining chip. This wasn't a fight for my past, it was a fight for their future. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A message from Michael. "Mom, is everything okay? Jess is acting strange." I blinked at the screen, reading the words over and over, feeling a quiet warmth spreading through me. Even though Michael wasn't here, his trust was. His faith in me gave me strength. I replied, "I'm handling it. Keep calm." Looking at Jessica, I could see she was searching for an escape but didn't know where to go. I moved gently toward the table, picked up the coffee cup, and said in an even tone, "Mr. Lewis, would you like some coffee?" I thought it might make this conversation more comfortable. The words were soft, but strategic, each one placed deliberately to guide the moment, to fill the tension with calm. As I prepared the coffee, my hands brushed over the familiar objects, the old ceramic jar, the hidden key to the safe, the small notebook where every detail about the house was recorded. These were my silent tools, powerful in their quietness, reminding me that true authority didn't come from shouting or imposing, but from control, readiness, and patience. Jessica's face tightened as she tried to appear composed, but her darting eyes betrayed her unease. Every drop of sweat, every unconscious twitch told me she was losing her grip. I understood now. This was the power of calm, not dominance through force, but presence so steady it makes others realize their own instability. I walked toward the window, resting my hand on the wooden frame as sunlight washed over my face. In that silence, I looked at Jessica again. "Jessica, I understand the pressure you are under, but pressure doesn't justify overlooking what truly matters. We have a responsibility to these walls, to these memories, to the children." My voice was low and steady, but each word carried weight, thickening the air with truth. Jessica lowered her head, her voice shaking. I didn't want to hurt anyone, Mom. I thought it would be best." I saw the struggle in her, wanting to do right by her children, but failing to see the emotional cost to me, to this home, to the shared past we all lived. I drew in a long breath, letting the air settle inside me. Now was the time to guide her toward the right path, to let her see her mistake on her own. I walked to the table, placing my hand gently on the documents, the keys, the quiet but significant proofs of life. My voice was deliberate, calm. Jessica, the house is not just a building. It's a part of our family's soul. And as much as you think you are helping, taking it away now, it changes everything. Mr. Lewis stood motionless, his eyes following every gesture, realizing that the true power in the room didn't belong to whoever held the contract, but to whoever could stay calm, in control, and emotionally steady. I turned back to Jessica, meeting her eyes one final time. It's not too late to make the right choice, but you need to see clearly what matters. She stepped back, lowering her gaze into silence, and in that moment, I knew she finally saw me, not as the shadowed mother-in-law, but as the keeper of memory, strength, and love that held this family together. Silence blanketed the living room, yet within it, I felt the force of composure and patience. I knew that if I stayed this course, order would return, and Jessica would gradually understand the true worth of what we had built. My heartbeat steadied, my breath deepened, and faith swelled inside me. I would protect this home, these memories, and my family at any cost. Each step I took on the wooden floor carried the weight of an unshakable resolve. I looked at Jessica, and in that moment, I understood. The battle was never to destroy her, but to teach her, to bring her back to the path I knew was right. Everything, the scratches on the table, the worn books, the family photos, had become my silent allies, standing beside me with the strength of memory and the quiet power of composure. The doorbell rang sharply, a jolt in the quiet morning, but I didn't rush to answer. A few seconds passed before I realized it was Mr. Lewis, the prospective buyer, standing at the threshold with a gaze both curious and cautious. I could feel his surprise as he stepped into the room, now taut like a drawn string, where the familiar keepsakes, photos, and family decorations had become silent instruments of influence. Jessica stood behind him, trying to maintain professional composure, but the strain was eating away at her nerves. I watched every subtle movement, her hands curling into fists inside her coat pockets, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes flicking around the room as if searching for an escape. I realized that the mental pressure had exceeded her capacity to control it. I offered a slight smile, enough to avoid direct confrontation, but heavy with the weight of silent authority. "Mr. Lewis, would you like some coffee?" I thought it might make this conversation more comfortable, I said, voice soft but full of confidence. As I rose from my chair to prepare the coffee, I observed every reaction, every glance from Jessica and Mr. Lewis. Each breath, each subtle look became a map I read with precision. Walking toward the kitchen, my hand brushed against the old ceramic jar where the small safe key was hidden. I held the key in my palm, feeling its weight and potential. It was not merely an object, but a strategic tool, protecting my family's interests and preserving the memories that were under threat. While brewing the coffee, I engaged Mr. Lewis in casual conversation, drawing him gently into personal topics. "So, how long have you been in Oakwood?" I asked softly, watching Jessica's reactions. He responded, slightly flustered, distracted by my calm guidance. I asked about his family, his favorite places. each question carefully designed to shift his attention from the sale to a more human connection. Jessica's sweat became more noticeable, her throat tightening each time she tried to intervene. I would subtly interject with a question or comment about Mr. Lewis, like waves gradually submerging her efforts to control the situation. The quiet moments, punctuated by the soft pouring of coffee, created a tense rhythm. I placed the cup on the table but did not hand it to Mr. Lewis immediately. It stood there as a small symbol of control, and I stepped back, eyes alternating between Jessica and him. I sensed a subtle shift in Mr. Lewis. He appeared uncertain, not about the transaction, but about whom to trust, about what to focus on. Jessica saw it too, her face taut with tension. She forced a strained smile, but her eyes revealed defeat. Calmly, I asked, "Mr. Lewis, may I ask, what matters most to you in a home? Safety? Memories? A sense of belonging?" Simple questions, yet each carried the quiet force that demanded pause, reflection, and attention. I looked at Jessica and saw her lowering her gaze, hands clutching her dress. She was realizing that the strategy of silent composure was prevailing. As Mr. Lewis answered, I gently set the coffee down and reached for the ceramic jar, holding the safe key in my hand, feeling the weight of the house itself. Every small action carried strategic significance, protecting interests, maintaining control, and guiding Jessica toward recognition of her mistake without direct confrontation. I turned to her, eyes steady. "Jessica, this house holds more than walls and furniture. It holds history, memories, love, and it deserves protection." My tone was not harsh, yet every word carried gravity. She said nothing, only standing there, breath uneven. I saw the internal struggle, wanting to do right for her children while feeling crushed by responsibility and pressure. I moved to the table, opened the small safe, and took out documents, contracts, the deed, and old letters. I laid them on the table in strategic order, showing that I was not just observing, but fully in command. These documents confirm ownership, rights, and the legacy this home carries. "I trust you understand why it must remain protected," I said to Mr. Lewis. Jessica watched every sheet, every symbol of authority I displayed. I saw her shoulders tremble, hands clenching. No shouting, no imposing force, just presence and preparation had turned the tide. In that moment, I felt power flow through me. Not the power of aggression or dominance, but the strength of patience, life experience, and preserved dignity. I realized true authority lies in composure, observation, and subtle strategy, not in yelling or coercion. After a brief pause, Mr. Lewis nodded slightly. "I understand now. This place is more than just a property." I smiled faintly, a subtle nod confirming that my strategy had succeeded. Jessica, standing beside him, no longer carried pride, only recognition that this mental battle, this time, she had lost. I inhaled deeply, feeling my heartbeat steady and a sense of pride and resolve rising. This was my way of protecting family, safeguarding memories, and guiding Jessica to understand the real value of what we had built. Everything, from small objects to family photos, from the safe key to legal documents, had become silent allies, helping me maintain order and authority. In that quiet moment, I knew this psychological confrontation was not just about keeping the house. It was a lesson in composure, strategy, and leading others to see the truth without force. I smiled inwardly, understanding that with patience and careful steps, pressure could always be transformed into an opportunity to protect what mattered most. I stood there, in the living room bathed in the pale afternoon light, listening to the steady tick of the wall clock. Every small sound in the house, the rustle of paper, the creak of old wooden floors, seemed sharpened, as if reminding me that the moment of reckoning had arrived. I took a deep breath, feeling my heartbeat steady, preparing for the next step, the step that would determine control, authority, and the safety of my family. Jessica remained there, half her head bowed, half her eyes furtively watching me. She tried to maintain composure, but I could see the beads of sweat on her forehead, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle twitch in her hands. She had realized that this game was no longer under her control. I walked to the table, where I had strategically arranged the crucial documents: deeds, purchase contracts, wills, and letters preserving family memories. My hand trembled slightly as I touched the old papers, feeling the weight of the past, present, and future of my family. I adjusted each sheet, placing them in a deliberate order, a clear statement that I was in control. "I think, Jessica, it's time we made everything clear," I said, voice calm yet commanding. "This house, it's more than a property, it's a legacy. And legacies deserve to be protected." My gaze lingered on the photo of my grandchildren playing in the living room, a reminder of why I was fighting. Mr. Lewis looked at me, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in his eyes. I smiled faintly, sensing the uncertainty in his gaze. I knew I had to seize the moment, and I chose to turn the situation around subtly yet decisively. I raised my hand, placing the papers on the table like pieces on a chessboard. Each document, each legal paper, was a symbol of my authority and a message that no decision would pass without my oversight. "I want you to understand, Mr. Lewis," I continued, voice steady enough for him to catch every word. "This house belongs to my family. I hold the deed. And not just the deed, the memories, the care, the love. All of it is safeguarded." I paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the heavy silence in the room. Jessica didn't dare respond, shrinking slightly into a corner, trying to maintain her dignity, but her eyes betrayed everything. I lifted an old will, holding it with reverence as if it were a treasure. "Here, this is the legal confirmation. Every word, every signature, every document confirms rightful ownership and my authority to protect it." I placed the paper near the photo of the grandchildren, adding softly, "This is not just about a building. This is where the children call home. The deed is safe. They are safe." Pressure mounted on Jessica. I saw her inhale deeply, attempting to stifle a sigh I knew she longed to release. I could feel her heartbeat, the tension clear in her shoulders and neck. I did not raise my voice, did not intimidate, simply calm, deliberate, and transparent. All authority now rested in my hands, and she knew it. I walked slowly, letting my gaze rest on every item in the room, every symbol of the family. I realized that each small object, from my husband's old fishing trophy to the framed photographs on the wall, was a silent ally in this battle. Every detail proved that this house was ours, not a commodity to be casually exchanged. "Jessica, I understand why you thought selling was the answer. But you overlooked one thing. This home is more than finances. It's memories, it's history, it's love," I said, voice soft yet weighted. I let each word settle, allowing her to feel that my strategy was not just protecting property, but the soul of our family. Mr. Lewis looked at me, recognition dawning. He realized that here, the decision was not about money alone. but about honoring the true value of a family. I smiled, sensing the balance of power shift. I had turned the tables. From the one caught off guard, from the one betrayed, I was now the one directing the encounter. Jessica no longer tried to resist. She stood quietly, eyes conflicted, angry, disappointed in herself, and aware that this time she had lost control. I looked at her, without anger or judgment, just a glance that conveyed clarity. Everything was settled, authority restored. I lifted another purchase contract, placing it beside the will, and said gently, "These documents ensure that every action is lawful, that the house remains a sanctuary for our children. It's protected, legally and emotionally. I hope you understand why it cannot be otherwise." Every word carried quiet strength, leaving Jessica and Mr. Lewis without room to interrupt or argue. I turned my back, placing the coffee cup on the table, feeling my heartbeat return to normal, my pride swelling quietly. I had not shouted, coerced, or let emotion spill over. I had been calm, strategic, and patient. In that moment, I knew I had won. Not only the battle over the house, but the psychological contest, the exercise in resilience, and the preservation of my family's most precious values. Jessica lowered her gaze. I could see the first signs of yielding, not complete, but enough to know that power had shifted. I stepped toward the door, looking at Mr. Lewis, smiling. "I trust you understand why this must be protected. Thank you for your patience." He nodded, awkward but respectful. As the door closed, I knew the psychological battle was over. I did not need aggression to win. I had prevailed through intelligence, patience, and calm. The house, the memories, the safety of the children, all were secured. I smiled inwardly, realizing that true power sometimes is not in shouting, but in composure, strategy, and steadfast resolve in the moments that matter most. The room was so quiet that I could hear every breath I took. Afternoon light streamed through the windows, glancing off the worn floorboards, each scratch and chip a reminder of the history this house had lived through with my family. I stood there, no longer feeling fear or confusion, only a steady calm, authority now firmly in my hands. Mr. Lewis shifted uneasily near the door, his eyes a mixture of respect and apprehension. He stepped forward with a hesitant smile and a small apology. "Mrs. Collins, I understand now. Thank you for clarifying everything. I appreciate your honesty." I smiled lightly, needing no more words, just a nod. I knew he had felt the weight and importance of what I had just demonstrated. Jessica stood pressed against a corner, her gaze avoiding mine, but betraying her tension and disappointment. She had never seen me like this. Calm, composed, authoritative in every gesture. I walked toward her, slowly, each step emphasizing control, not to humiliate, but to establish clear boundaries. "I won't throw you out, Jessica," I said, voice calm yet sharp. "I'm not here to humiliate you. But this house, this family, these children, they deserve protection, and that protection starts with clear boundaries." My gaze held hers, letting her realize that these words were not rebukes, but a lesson in maturity, responsibility, and steadfastness. I took the spare key from inside my sleeve and placed it on the table in front of her. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for it. "Here," I said. "This is your copy. This house is safe. Now, we need to talk about whether our family is safe. Forgiveness is earned, not given instantly." I wanted her to understand that, while I had offered some measure of forgiveness, authority and boundaries remained. Jessica looked down at the key, then into my eyes. searching for a way out of guilt and pressure. I could see her inner struggle, fear, shame, and regret battling inside her. But I did not rush her. Forgiveness was not immediate. She had to acknowledge her responsibility before our family could truly find peace. Michael, my son, entered the room at that moment. He stood silently, looking from me to Jessica. "Mom, I didn't know it was this serious," he said, voice trembling with worry and disappointment. I simply nodded, smiling faintly. He needs to understand that control, boundaries, and patience are the keys to protecting the family. I did not need to spell it out. My actions spoke for themselves. Jessica moved to Michael's side, her hands gently resting on his shoulders. I watched them silently, noticing the subtle yet meaningful gestures. She was trying to make amends in her own way, not through words, but through action, through re-establishing order and thoughtful care. I smiled inwardly, knowing this was the first step toward healing. I turned my attention to the room, taking in every item, every family memento. My husband's old fishing trophy still sat there, worn but full of sentimental value. Photographs on the wall, the antique bookshelves, every detail reminded me that authority was not just about controlling property, but preserving memories and the spiritual value of family. The quiet minutes passed, and I felt the rhythm of life return to the house. Balance filled the space. Jessica knew I could not be deceived. Mr. Lewis understood that this was no ordinary transaction, and I felt a profound pride in maintaining authority while keeping compassion intact. "I've learned something," I whispered to myself. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is a controlled choice, a way to protect what matters most. I looked out the window as the sunset's light filled the room, illuminating every object, every photograph. Everything was clear. Everything was still. Jessica approached slowly and whispered, "Mom, I know I messed up. I'll do better. I want to rebuild trust." I nodded, not rushing to give her everything, but enough for her to know the door was open. Reconciliation required action, not mere words. In that moment, I realized that true victory was not about defeating anyone, but about maintaining respect, keeping the family intact, and establishing clear boundaries. I smiled, feeling each heartbeat steady in my chest. Peaceful, strong, full of hope. When Mr. Lewis left, Jessica stood still, watching him go, then looked back at me. I raised my hand slightly, emphasizing, "Remember, Jessica, boundaries define safety, and safety is the foundation for trust, love, and healing." She nodded, this time fully acknowledging it, no longer avoiding. I walked around the room, picking up a few items displaced during the tension. A slightly tilted photo, a leaning trophy, and returned them to their places. I realized that sometimes restoring physical order was a way to restore mental and emotional order as well. Everything had structure. Everything had boundaries. And I, Maggie Collins, felt true authority restored in my hands. Looking out into the backyard, where flowers still bloomed vibrantly, I felt a surge of renewed energy. Family, memories, the home, all were protected. Boundaries were established, and this victory was not just a personal triumph, but a powerful statement of steadfastness, compassion, and strategic wisdom. I stepped to the window, inhaled deeply, and knew I was ready for the next steps in the journey of healing our family. After the tense afternoon, the house settled into an unusual quiet. No more forced laughter, no more anxious glances from Jessica. only silence, mingling with the aroma of fresh coffee, the faint scent of books and paper, and the gentle fragrance of jasmine from the vases on the kitchen table. I moved through each room, taking deep breaths, sensing life slowly returning to the space I had protected all my life. Each step across the wooden floor sounded muted yet deliberate, reminding me that true authority no longer lay in confrontation or tension, but in small, deliberate actions. Power built through patience, observation, and careful control of the situation. The backyard garden became the place where I reclaimed my own breath. I spent several minutes tending the old flower beds, trimming wilted branches, watering dry soil, feeling life flow through my hands. Every stem, every leaf reminded me that true power was not in imposition, but in steadfast care. When my fingers brushed the remaining yellow chrysanthemums from summer, memories of my late husband surfaced, days when we watered together, laughed, and planned the next planting season. The memory was gentle, yet it reinforced that my strength was nurtured through experience, through living slowly, observing closely. Jessica moved around the kitchen with small, deliberate gestures, picking up leftover cups from the table, carefully placing them in the sink. I observed, realizing that these were not direct apologies, but acts of atonement. She was learning to stand steady in her space, to appreciate the subtle authority I had just demonstrated. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a displaced trophy and set it back gently. I smiled inwardly, recognizing that she was beginning to understand that even the smallest actions carry meaning, and awareness of this was the first step toward restoring trust within the family. Michael wandered into the living room, his eyes bright with worry yet brimming with hope. He looked to me as if seeking guidance, the stability that only a seasoned mother could provide. I nodded slightly, needing no words. Just through my presence, he understood that balance was gradually returning. I sensed his heartbeat steadying, as if my calmness transmitted a reassuring energy to every family member. The house held a distinctive quiet, not the silence of fear or tension, but the silence of order, of a newly established equilibrium. I walked through the living room, resting my hand on the sofa, where I had spent hours reading and recording family memories. A warm energy radiated, reminding me that power is not about domination or intimidation, but observation, patience, and deft management of the environment. Jessica continued tidying, this time with order and care. She picked up a cloth, wiped the kitchen table, and then looked out the window, taking a deep breath. I approached gently and asked, "How are you feeling?" The question was not interrogative, but observational, wanting to know if she had grasped the lesson about boundaries, responsibility, and trust. Jessica exhaled, meeting my eyes, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of realization, a hint of understanding about having overstepped. I know I have a lot to make up for," she murmured, voice slightly trembling, tinged with unease. I nodded, my gaze conveying that this was only the first step, but an important one. My phone buzzed lightly on the table. Michael had sent a message. "Mom, she's trying. I think she really wants to fix things." I read it, smiling, sensing Jessica's internal movement. It reminded me that healing was not mine alone, but a process in which the entire family learned to understand, respect, and take responsibility together. I looked at the family photos, moments that had been forgotten amid tension, now alive again. Jessica's eyes lingered on them, quietly reminding herself of the true value of this home, not just as property, but as memories, connection, and love. A quiet joy filled me, for this was proof that authority can be nurtured through subtle actions and gestures, not through shouting or force. That evening, I prepared a simple yet heartfelt meal, the aroma of coffee and toasted bread filling the house. Jessica helped by picking vegetables. Michael arranged the table. The air still held a trace of hesitation, but there were small smiles, respectful glances. Each gesture, each act was a brick in rebuilding trust, connection, and order in the family. I realized that often, these small actions determine long-lasting change more than words or fleeting tension ever could. After dinner, I stepped onto the balcony to watch the dusk sky. Sunset light reflected on the floor, emphasizing every line of the house, reminding me that real strength often lies in patience and subtle observation. I felt a gentle shift in the atmosphere, from tension to awareness, from fear to respect. Jessica's small, imperfect gestures were laying the groundwork for healing. Returning to the living room, I sipped coffee, watching Jessica put a few books back in place. Michael sat beside her, speaking softly, without pressure, gently supporting her. The space felt whole again, completed by these silent, deliberate acts. I reminded myself that this was the foundation for recovery. Boundaries established, trust slowly rebuilt, subtle authority returning to the family. As night fell, the soft golden glow from the hanging lights reflected off the polished floor, highlighting every small detail in the room, reminding me that power does not always reside in confrontation, but in quiet, patient, meaningful actions. I smiled inwardly, knowing that I, Maggie Collins, had laid the foundation for healing. Compassion without relinquishing boundaries, observation without losing authority, patience yet firm enough to protect what I cherished most. That evening, my kitchen came alive in a completely different way. Gone were the forced laughs and anxious glances. Instead, there was focus, tentative yet full of anticipation from everyone. Michael entered, bringing Jessica and the two little ones, Lily and Noah, their steps a mix of excitement and hesitation. I stood there, observing every detail. Jessica's shy smile as she looked around the kitchen, her hands gently placing her purse on a chair, and the lingering tension in her bright eyes. I inhaled deeply, savoring the lingering coffee aroma on the counter and the scent of jasmine filling the room. Everything felt familiar, yet the soft golden light from the ceiling lamp made the kitchen warmer, embracing all the layered emotions in the space. I stepped to the dining table, resting my hand lightly on the tablecloth, feeling each fiber speak of the patience cultivated over countless years. "Dinner's ready," I said, my voice smooth as flowing water, yet full of authority. I invited everyone to sit, serving dishes that were childhood memories for Jessica. Tender beefsteak, creamy mashed potatoes, caramelized carrots, and the family's signature salad with homemade vinaigrette. I noticed Jessica's eyes widen at the spread, as if recognizing a forgotten piece of memory. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her fork, and Lily quickly chimed, "Mom, it smells so good." The little girl's words brought a gentle smile to the whole room. Michael sat beside Jessica, looking at her with a mix of concern and respect. I watched him place his hand over hers in support, without imposing, helping Jessica breathe more steadily. That moment reminded me that healing was not only about forgiveness, it was about awareness, companionship, and trust being rebuilt through simple yet meaningful acts. I began serving the meal, gently guiding each dish. Lily, try the mashed potatoes. I know it was your favorite last year. Noah, the steak is cooked just the way you like. I spoke as if telling a story, not imposing. Yet each word carried the message that this was family, a place where love persisted, despite past mistakes. Jessica met my gaze, and in her eyes I saw surprise, a hint of regret, and even hope. During the meal, I observed Jessica's small gestures. She did not need to voice an apology. She poured water for the children, gently placed a napkin on Lily's lap when she spilled, and adjusted a displaced fishing trophy back on its shelf. Her eyes reflected a mix of worry and quiet determination. She wanted to do right. I sipped coffee slowly, savoring the aroma, quietly observing. A silent joy filled me as I saw her begin to acknowledge her mistakes. She spoke, voice slightly trembling. I know I messed up. I was so focused on money, on trying to fix things for you all, that I didn't see what I was losing. I closed my eyes, feeling each syllable, each vibration, and silently acknowledged that this was the first step toward healing. The atmosphere warmed as Jessica continued to open up. I didn't realize how much I was hurting everyone. I thought I was helping, but I was blind. Her eyes glistened, yet there was no whining, no blaming. This was genuine acknowledgement, a moment I had long awaited. I gently placed my hand over hers. I forgive your mistake, but not the intention. We start over. My words were both forgiveness and a clear message about boundaries. Love comes with conditions, and healing requires time and awareness. Lily and Noah looked at their mother, then at me, their eyes wide with curiosity. I smiled at them, feeling the walls between generations begin to crumble. Michael exhaled, releasing a long-held weight. I realized that this moment was not only for Jessica, but also a lesson for the whole family. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and healing does not mean abandoning boundaries. After dinner, we cleaned together, each small action a symbol of newfound unity. Jessica wiped the table herself, placing cutlery in the tray, while Michael helped the children wash dishes. I stood back, observing every gesture, every glance, feeling quiet joy spread through the house. Things were not perfect, but they were moving in the right direction. I stepped onto the balcony, gazing at the night sky. The light of a newly appearing star reflected through the window, casting thin streams of light across the wooden floor. I closed my eyes, sensing the rhythm of the house, the family, and my own heartbeat, all more balanced, gentler. I knew that, although much work remained, this moment marked a profound change. Forgiveness was taking root, trust was being rebuilt, and the family was returning to order, love, and hope. When I returned to the living room, Jessica and the children sat on the sofa, speaking softly, smiles emerging, tentative but genuine. I felt a quiet joy, a proud satisfaction without noise. True power sometimes is not control or imposition, but the ability to listen, observe, and guide with emotion, patience, and subtle understanding. And in that moment, I, Maggie Collins, knew that the family had crossed a dangerous boundary. And though the road ahead remained long, the first step of healing, through forgiveness and awareness, had been firmly laid. That morning, Oakwood woke under a thin veil of mist, quietly draping the old cobblestone streets, sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting faint streaks of light across weathered rooftops, and the glass panes yellowed with age. I stood on the porch, a warm cup of coffee in hand, inhaling the scent of dew-laced earth mingling with jasmine from the small garden beside the house. My heart felt both calm and wistful. This house was not merely a shelter, it was a collection of memories, love, disappointments, and hopes that George and I had nurtured for decades. It was a living part of us, of this family, and now I had to learn to care for it, not only with my hands, but with my heart. Jessica appeared from the kitchen doorway, moving softly, quietly. Her eyes were cautious, mixed with remorse and resolve. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the subtle trembling of her hands as she held a small photo frame, one of the precious keepsakes she had dropped the day before in her hurry. I smiled, saying nothing, simply observing her and the children, Lily and Noah, running around the yard, tossing dry twigs to each other, their clear laughter ringing through the tranquil air. That sound, the rustling wind, the jasmine scent, they all served as a gentle reminder that, despite the cracks in the family, life went on, and hope still endured. I took the frame from Jessica, wiping the dust off the glass. The photo was a family memory, taken over a decade ago. George, myself, Michael, Jessica, and the two children. I adjusted its position on the display table, then handed it back to Jessica. She held it, eyes wide, looking at the photograph as if rediscovering a piece of forgotten memory. Her voice was soft, tinged with emotion. "Mom, I understand now." I nodded, saying nothing more, letting the space fill naturally with understanding and the quiet flow of forgiveness. Next, I wandered through the backyard, where we had planted little trees when Michael was small, the same spot George tended each morning. George's old fishing trophy, chipped from an accident, I picked up, cleaned, and placed it back on the shelf beside the photo. Each object, each memory, I arranged carefully, just as I intended to realign relationships. Gently, meticulously, mindfully. I felt the intertwining of power and peace, not from shouting or coercion, but from patience, respect, and purposeful action. Jessica stood beside me, watching closely, then quietly said, "Mom, I thought I was saving them, but you were saving me from myself." Her words made me close my eyes, feeling the swell of emotions, pride, gratitude, and deep affection. I placed a hand on her shoulder, my voice steady and warm. "Family isn't a legal contract, Jessica. It's a promise, and promises have room for mistakes. Learn to treasure where you belong." I sensed that forgiveness had begun to take root within her, while also reminding her of responsibility, love, and patience within the family. Together, we approached the newly planted tree in the corner of the yard, a living symbol of rebirth and continuity. I pressed the soil gently around its base, and Jessica and the children followed, hands muddy but eyes full of delight. This seemingly simple moment contained power. Every small act contributed to healing, rebuilding the foundation of the family. I realized that true strength did not come from authority or wealth, but from patience, love, and the capacity to forgive. Michael stepped closer, placing a hand on Jessica's shoulder, glancing down at the children with a gentle smile. "It feels like home again." I stood slightly apart, observing it all, recognizing the harmony returning to every corner of the house. No tension remained, only laughter, conversation, and the silence of trust replacing doubt. Light steps, soft words, and subtle gestures painted a family tableau, brimming with color, love, and hope. I understood that the process of healing did not end here. It was an ongoing journey, requiring patience and courage. Yet, in this moment, I felt completeness. Love had been consciously chosen. Forgiveness had begun to sprout. And the true legacy George and I left was not the house or possessions, but the ability to love, nurture, and sustain a family through trials. As the sun set, Jessica and I stood side by side, hands on the new tree. We spoke little, simply sharing a smile, eyes exchanging profound understanding. I knew the family was not perfect, but it could grow stronger through every crack. I inhaled deeply, the scents of jasmine and coffee mingling with the cool evening air, and felt that all of us, myself, Jessica, Michael, Lily, Noah, were stepping into a new chapter, filled with love and hope. The house stood firm beneath the oakwood sky, now not merely a place, but a living testament to the power of healing, forgiveness, and rebuilding what matters most in life: family, love, and a spiritual legacy. I knew George would have smiled seeing us now, and I felt his presence in every keepsake, every glance, and every breath of our family. I, Maggie Collins, smiled, realizing that true legacy is not what we own, but what we pass on: love, patience, and the capacity to forgive. Every gesture, every word, every small act, tending a tree, arranging old possessions, teaching the children how to love, was part of that legacy. We stood together by the newly planted tree, watching the sunset paint the garden red, and I knew that, though challenges lay ahead, this family had found the strength to continue, to remain united, and to grow together. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment, listening to children's laughter, the rustling leaves, and the lingering jasmine scent. Everything felt complete, and I realized that no legal contract is more important than a promise, and no inheritance more precious than love and forgiveness. Oakwood, this house, and my family all bore witness to that truth. By the time the sun dipped behind the oakwood trees, the house was quiet again, filled with the soft rhythm of life slowly mending. I didn't need to shout or strike back. The papers, the patience, and the small, deliberate gestures had spoken for me. Justice had its own quiet way of arriving, and forgiveness, carefully chosen, became the bridge between what was broken and what could be rebuilt. Family isn't about who wins or who loses. It's about who stays, who listens, and who learns to heal together. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where staying calm and letting time, and your own courage, speak louder than anger made all the difference? Share your story in the comments.